Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. Today's episode is Hannibal Season 2, Episode 6, Futamono. The episode in a nutshell is just a brief summary of exactly what happens within this episode. So quite a bit happens in this episode. Um, The episode opens on a man with a tree growing out of him and all of his internal organs except the lungs being replaced with various toxic flowers. And then after they are at the crime scene, Jack goes to speak to Hannibal, and Hannibal basically says that he has realized he cannot help Will. Will's in too dark of a place. Can't deal with him, even though he's the one who put him in said dark place. And then Jack tries to bring up the new Ripper kill, and Hannibal says basically, I want out of all of it. I don't even want to help you with your crime scenes anymore. However, for the good old times, because we're personally friendly, I'm going to invite you to a dinner party I'm holding. We then move on to Will in his cell, which happens to be next to Abel's cell, and because obviously the bars are open, they're able to talk between each other's cells. And Abel, while talking to Will about Hannibal, Will basically tells him, you know what, he's gonna kill you. You shouldn't be trying to cover for him or lying. And Abel makes the decision to accurately describe when Will was having a fit in the corner. He describes Hannibal's dining room and how Hannibal was the one to suggest that he kill Alana Bloom. Chilton, of course, always records everything in the hospital, and he's been listening, so he brings that recording to Jack at the office, and they basically have a conversation about how, like, Jack thinks Will is unstable, and Chilton reminds him even if he's unstable, that doesn't necessarily mean he was wrong, and even if Abel is psychotic, he's not psychic, and so he may be telling the truth. At least it's worth considering or looking into, which Jack agrees. We then go to the lab where Brian and Jimmy inform Jack about how the victim was a city councilman who approved paving over a nesting bird habitat through not necessarily likable means, and then kind of also note some of the evidence that they found, including the fact that his lungs were filled with water and the water contained little microorganisms that are only found within a 50-mile sort of radius search area at a particular park, which helps to narrow down kind of where the Ripper may be. We then have Jack and Alana out walking Will's dogs, and they talk about Will, and Alana basically says that she now considers Will to be dangerous as he tried to kill Hannibal, and that as she knew Hannibal before she even knew Will and Jack for the longest amount of time, she's going to be on his side. And we then have Hannibal visiting Will, and he talks about how his friendship is betrayed by Will trying to kill him and how Will has managed to hurt him deeply. And then he kind of brings up that, he's angry. He can understand why Will would be angry at himself for, you know, Beverly being killed at his behest because he sent Beverly after him, and Will denies that he's angry at himself, that he's solely angry with the person who killed Beverly, i.e., Hannibal. And that is amusing to me. That Hannibal is, oh gosh, puts basically Hannibal is the cause of everything and seems to be trying to like gaslight Will into thinking it's his fault. Anywho, and then obviously he also notes information about Alana and, like I said, gaslights Will into thinking that, trying to gaslight Will into thinking like he's somehow at fault for Beverly, and how Alana also should be careful because obviously that's another connection that they have. And then we get a bit of a cooking montage as he is throwing a dinner party. We see him taking out recipes and then going through his Rolodex and taking out cards as he is cooking, which is meant to imply that he is cooking with people. We then have Chilton bringing out Abel from his cell, and he sort of threatens him about how, people may not like Chilton, but the nurse that Abel killed, as well as the guards that he killed back in the day, they were all well liked, and, he should be careful about that before taking Abel to one of the cages where Jack comes in to ask about the recording. Abel decides to lie to Jack and begins the framing of Chilton as the Ripper potentially, as he says that he got the room's description from Chilton and notes how Chilton somewhat would fit the MO of the Ripper and how it would then benefit Chilton to make Abel think he was the Ripper. Basically, he's implying a lot there. Abel then is taken back to his cell after speaking with Jack, and decides to taunt the guards that are escorting him about the nurse who he had just been warned was friendly with the guards and well liked as a person. And this ends as you would expect with him being beaten and then thrown off the stairs onto a cage where what looks like a medical personnel is writing up reports or something. And we then move over to Hannibal's dinner party taking place. Jack arrives briefly, takes away some samples, which makes both Alana and Hannibal somewhat suspicious, but he takes those samples away and leaves early. And then Alana stays late at the party, and she ends up playing, I believe it's a harpsichord, with Hannibal. I'm not familiar with instruments, I could be wrong, but I think they mentioned that it's a harpsichord, or that Hannibal has mentioned that's what he plays back when Tobias Budge he was at that string shop. Anywho, I'm assuming it's a harpsichord, could be wrong. Harpsichord plays the harpsichord with Hannibal, they flirt, she drinks heavily, they tumble around a bit, and then he basically waits for her to fall asleep, and then sneaks out to visit Gideon, and we see him showing up in a doctor outfit. We then have it time skipping to the next day where Jack arrives at the hospital where the guard who is supposed to be watching Abel is strung up with fish hooks and disemboweled with his badge sitting on top of his intestines. And basically, it's determined that Abel, with a broken back, could not possibly have committed the murder, therefore, it is definitely the Ripper, and they are assuming the Ripper has Abel. We then move on to Jack, who has had a bit of a suspicion about Hannibal, deciding to go ahead and visit Hannibal, who has woken up next to Alana, making it appear as though he has been there the whole night, and him and Alana talk about letting Will go. Jack then, again, like I said, visits and asks about Abel, asking Hannibal where he was last night and if anyone can verify it. And then Alana comes out in his shirt and basically says she was there all night, he was with her. We know that's not true, but she believes it, and she's basically providing the alibi. We then get one of the best endings of an episode with Hannibal, who decides to, we start with him cooking, another cooking montage, and then it's like a clay-baked thigh, and he puts it down in front of Abel, who is in his dining room, and we see that Abel's leg is missing, and he won't be eating it because his back is broken. So Hannibal has Abel over for dinner, where they have Abel for dinner, and Abel is made to eat himself, which is just terrible, but highly amusing at the same time. Then we return to Jack, where the lab has found samples that he brought from the party were all actual animals, so he wasn't feeding his guests people. So the implication we got at the beginning, cooking montage, was wrong in this case. And then they go over to look at the lure evidence, which basically contains lures made from all of the victims since Will was put into prison or his psychiatric facility, criminally insane institution. And also from Abigail and Marissa Shore and Kathy Boyle and Gretchen mentioned. So basically, more body parts, new lures that were made with the previous victims that were previously attributed to Will, showing that he did not kill them, and then the new victims showing that Will was innocent as he had claimed. All the victims have belonged to the Ripper, and there never was a copycat, just as Will had claimed. And one of the lures happens to have a piece of wood, which is within a smaller area of the range that they had gotten from the microorganisms in the water. This leads them to a cabin, and Jack arrives at the cabin. He searches it as Hannibal plays his harpsichord in the background, and it kind of flashes back and forth. And as he's searching the cabin building, he happens to find at the bottom of like a cylinder with like a lid on it, Miriam at the bottom, armless but otherwise alive, and that is the sort of cliffhanger discovery that we end the episode on. So now that we've been reminded about what happens, and that was a lot that happened, it's now time to rank the episode, and as always, we're going to rank on our mostly objective ranking list as well as our personal ranking list. Starting with our mostly objective rank values, I highlighted the ones I felt applied to the episode, and we start with 3 points for our multi-episode supporting character development, which is the development of Miriam Lass being found alive, and that is worth 3 points. We then have a supporting relationship development, which is also worth 3 points, and this is, of course, Elena and Hannibal's flirtation at the end of the party, leading to a tumble in the bedroom, and then her becoming the alibi, and their like morning conversation about both wanting to put Will behind them, because when you've tumbled with someone, the first thing you can think of is to talk about someone else. But either way, new development. They're in some sort of now romantic relationship, so that is worth the 3 points. We then have our multi-season supporting character development, which is Abel, whose back gets broken and gets kidnapped from the hospital by Hannibal, who kills the guard, and then ends up at Hannibal's house in a wheelchair at his dining table, missing a thigh, as he is then made to eat said thigh that has been baked into clay. So basically served himself for dinner and actually eats it, so very interesting choice there. I love that scene. And then we have our impactful, memorable moment line, etc. And goes without saying, eating your own thigh falls into this category. Very memorable. But more so even than that is the tree murder. The imagery of the tree murder with the guy who has the tree growing out of his limbs through his body and all of his organs replaced with like toxic flowers that are actually very beautiful. That is extremely memorable. I had actually forgotten the thigh thing happened in this episode. What I remembered most from this episode was the aesthetic of the murder. So that is worth the 3 points as well. Oh, shoot. Sorry, my bad. It's 2 points for the multi-episode supporting character, 2 points for the supporting relationship development, then 3 points for multi-season supporting character development, and 3 points for the impactful slash memorable moment line, etc. With the tree murder, I think I had said the first two were threes as well. That's not the case. That brings us to 10 points. However, I do have to take 2 points for the weak subplot concept, which is the Selena and Hannibal relationship. I know it was only done for like an alibi, and especially an alibi that Jack would trust because Alana obviously is somebody that he trusts. I don't know. I've never shipped them together at all. And obviously, spoilers ahead, as rewatchers, we know it doesn't really last that long, so it's kind of like an endeavor into something that I'm not overly on board with. And then it doesn't even last that long, so it's really like, why put me through it? And I just feel like apart from the alibi, after that, it doesn't really add anything to the series, so it would have been better as a one night stand. But again, spoilers, we know that that doesn't necessarily happen, that they do seem to be not quite a one night stand in the future. So again, I don't like this subplot, so it's minusing 2 points, which brings this episode to an 8 out of 10 objectively. So our season 2 rankings so far on our mostly objective ranking is in first place Kaiseki, second Mukozuke, third is this episode Futomono, then Hasun, Sakazuke, and Takiwase in sixth so far. So my personal opinion on this episode, like I said, one of the most memorable body displays aesthetically was that tree murder. I think it looked actually very beautiful, and you couldn't really even see the body in the tree. It just looked like a flowering tree with flowers in the middle. Of course, when they do the close-ups, you see that there's a body there, but from a distance, you don't really see the body there, and it just looks very aesthetically beautiful. And like I said, it's very memorable. Before Hannibal comes to visit Will in his institution when he's in the cage, Will has some antlers, and very, very, very full antlers with lots of spikes grow out of his head and bursting up through the top of the cage before Hannibal then arrives. The imagery of the guard's murder, I mean, he was strung up by the lures, and that was more, purposeful in giving the lures with human bits that look exactly like the ones Will made to basically show he is innocent of the crimes that he had been accused of before, and that those lures were likely planted, and it was the Ripper all along. But aesthetically, it didn't really speak to me at all on that one. As I mentioned before, the Alana Hannibal side quest, not very attractive. I did not like that at all. And I wish they had not included that. I mean, there are other romances in the future for both of those characters that are just a better fit. So, not fond of that. So that takes off some points. However, I like that we're finally getting Jack starting to suspect Hannibal, starting to catch Will's wavelength that he's been trying to get him to for several episodes, basically the entire season so far. So I'm glad at the sixth episode he's finally kind of waking up to Hannibal maybe actually being evil, though of course the samples of the dinner party dishes does put that back a little bit. But at least Jack is now sure that Will is innocent and is not the Ripper, which is great. And that he also was framed, which is great. Good progress, good development. I really like Lucine. I just find it so amusing in a really terrible, like, dark humor way that Abel gets kidnapped from the hospital and basically has his thigh cooked for him by Hannibal, and then he is served said thigh, and then he eats said thigh. Definitely in a dark humor way, but I just think the whole concept of that is so wild and out there that it ends up kind of circling back from serious to amusing, because it's just your brain does not wrap around that, and you can just imagine how horribly traumatic that would be if it was real. But as a fictional concept, like I said, maybe just a little bit amusing. I laugh at it. I think it's funny. I think it's actually terribly dark, humorously funny. That didn't make sense, but that's what I'm saying. I stand by it. And then, of course, I love the cliffhanger at the end where we find that Miriam Lass has actually been alive. So for the years in which they thought she was dead, she has been with Hannibal. And that is interesting. And she also obviously has been well taken care of because even though she's dirty, she is in a nice dress. She does have her hair trimmed. She is missing an arm, but we knew that because the arm was used to taunt Jack in the last season. But again, that cliffhanger, amazing. So, overall, mostly positive, couple negatives distracting from it. That's why I decided to agree with the mostly objective ranking, and I also gave it an 8 out of 10, which brings our season 2 ranking so far for the personal ranking to in first place Mukozuke, Hasan, Kaiseki. This episode came in fourth, Futamono, and then Sakazuke and Takawase in sixth. That now brings us to our series ranking so far, and on our mostly objective ranking, we have season 1 with a score of 83.85% and season 2 so far with a score of 47 out of 130. And then on the personal ranking side, we have season 1 with 66.92% and season 1 so far with 51 out of 130. With that, we've now rewatched and ranked Hannibal Season 2, Episode 6, Futamono. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.